For 60 minutes, we travel back to the deserts of 7th century Arabia. Close your eyes. What do you hear? The wind across the dunes? The market chatter of Mecca? Now listen deeper. Hear the sound of chains dragging across burning sand. Hear the crack of a whip. Hear the ragged breath of a man being crushed, not just by a heavy stone, but by the entire weight of a cruel society. His name was Bilal. He was an Abyssinian, an African, a slave. He owned nothing. Not his time, not his body, not his future. His life had a price tag placed on it by his master, Umayyah ibn Khalaf, a leading nobleman of the powerful Quraysh tribe. Bilal's purpose was to serve, to obey, to be invisible. But then a whisper began to spread through the alleyways of Mecca, a whisper about a man named Muhammad, who spoke of a God who saw no difference between master and slave, between Arab and Abyssinian, between the powerful and the powerless. Bilal heard this whisper, and when the call came, his heart recognized its truth. He stood before his master and declared the Shahada, "I bear witness there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger." In that moment, Bilal claimed ownership of the only thing no man could ever take from him, his soul. And for that act of ultimate freedom, hell was unleashed upon him. Umayyah ibn Khalaf was not merely angry, he was terrified. Bilal's conversion was a direct threat to the entire social order. If a slave could be the equal of his master in the eyes of this new God, then the foundation of their wealth, their power, their very identity would crumble. Bilal had to be made an example. He was dragged out of the city at the peak of the day's heat, when the Arabian sun transforms the desert into a merciless oven. He was stripped and forced onto the scalding sand. Then the nobles placed a massive boulder on his bare chest. The weight was designed to steal the air from his lungs, to mimic the crushing pressure of societal conformity they demanded. Umayyah stood over him. "Renounce Muhammad," he would snarl. "Praise our goddesses, Al-Lat and Al-Uzza." Bilal's lips, cracked and bleeding from thirst, would move, but they did not form the words of denial. Instead, with each labored breath, with the weight of the stone threatening to shatter his ribs, he uttered a single defiant word: Ahad, 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 one, one, one. It was the essence of the message he had embraced. God is one, unique, indivisible, unpartnered. The idolaters would pour scorn upon him. "Do you hear that?" they'd mock. Even in his torment, all he knows how to say is Ahad. What they heard as the simplistic muttering of a broken slave was, in reality, the most profound theological declaration. He was affirming the absolute oneness of the divine while lying under the weight of the very polytheism he rejected. Days turned into a relentless cycle of torment. The whip would fall, the stone would press, the taunts would fly, and the reply remained the same: Ahad. It was not a scream of pain, but a steady, rhythmic affirmation of truth. News of this unbreakable slave reached the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. His heart ached for Bilal, but his means to stop it were limited. Yet he offered a comfort that transcended physical rescue. He would say to his companions, when speaking of steadfastness under trial, take an example from Bilal. In the deepest furnace of persecution, Bilal was becoming a benchmark for faith. The torture reached a critical point. Umayyah, frustrated by Bilal's indomitable spirit, took him to the desert with a new intent. He tied a rope around Bilal's neck and gave it to the children of the streets, allowing them to drag him and beat him like an animal through the dirt of Mecca. It was a final attempt to strip him not just of his faith, but of the last vestiges of his human dignity. In that moment of profound humiliation, a witness emerged from the crowd. It was Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, the Prophet's closest friend, and a man of both immense wealth and even greater compassion. Abu Bakr was a respected merchant, and his status commanded attention. He confronted Umayyah. "Have you no fear of God," Abu Bakr demanded, "that you treat this man in such a manner?" Umayyah, ever the businessman, saw an opportunity. "If you are so moved by pity for him," he retorted, "then buy him. He is for sale." This was the calculus of the pre-Islamic world. Every being had a price. Abu Bakr, without hesitation, engaged in the transaction. He paid an exorbitant sum, far above the market value for a slave. Some narrations say he paid 9 ounces of gold. Critics among the Quraysh mocked Abu Bakr, saying, "You have paid too much. He is not worth that price." Abu Bakr's reply cut to the heart of the matter. "By Allah, if Umayyah had asked for 100 ounces, I would have paid it." This was not a mere purchase of labor. It was a redemption of a human soul. The transaction complete, Abu Bakr turned to Bilal and spoke the words that would change his life forever. "You are free, Bilal." The chains, literal and societal, fell away. The man who was property was now his own master. He was no longer Bilal, the slave of Umayyah. He was Bilal, a free man of Allah. Liberation was just the beginning of Bilal's new life. He immediately dedicated his newfound freedom entirely to the service of the one who had made it meaningful. He became a constant, devoted shadow to the Prophet Muhammad. He was more than a companion, he was a personal attendant, a trusted confidant, and a member of the household. When the Prophet emigrated from Mecca to Medina in the Great Hijrah, Bilal was by his side. In Medina, as the first Muslim community took shape, the Prophet faced a practical question. How would the faithful be called to prayer 5 times a day? The method needed to be dignified, clear, and unifying. Various suggestions were made, a bell like the Christians, a horn like the Jews. None felt right for the unique character of this community. Then a companion named Abdullah ibn Zayd had a dream. In it, a man in green garments taught him the words of the call to prayer and its method. He described this to the Prophet, who recognized it as a true vision. The Prophet then asked, "Who has the most beautiful and powerful voice among us?" The companions did not hesitate. They pointed to Bilal. The man whose voice had been used to cry, "Ahad," under torture was now chosen to lift the same message to the heavens for all to hear. The Prophet instructed Bilal to learn the words and to give the call. Bilal ascended to the highest point near the mosque, faced the Qibla, and for the first time in history, the melodious, soul-stirring notes of the Islamic adhan echoed through the valleys of Medina. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. In that moment, the slave who was once dragged through the dirt was elevated to the position of muazzin, the caller to prayer for the entire ummah of Muhammad. His voice became the timeless symbol of the Islamic faith. Bilal's devotion was not confined to the peaceful precincts of the mosque. When the nascent Muslim community in Medina was forced to defend its very existence against the armies of Mecca, Bilal stood as a warrior. He fought with the same unwavering conviction with which he had endured torture. His presence on the battlefield was a living rebuke to the Meccan elite who had once owned him. The zenith of this poetic justice came during the Battle of Badr, the first major military confrontation. Among the leaders of the Meccan army was Bilal's former master, Umayyah ibn Khalaf. Umayyah, who had once placed a stone on Bilal's chest, now found himself facing the consequences of his tyranny on the field of battle. As the battle turned in favor of the Muslims, Umayyah was trying to flee. Bilal caught sight of him. The memory of the scorching sand, the crushing weight, the public humiliation must have surged within him. He did not seek personal vengeance in a blind rage. Instead, he raised his voice so all could hear, declaring, "The head of disbelief, Umayyah ibn Khalaf, may I not live if he escapes." It was a call for justice, not mere revenge. Other Muslim soldiers surrounded Umayyah. Bilal did not strike the final blow himself, but his cry sealed the fate of the man who represented the oppressive system he had escaped. Later, after the Muslim conquest of Mecca, when the Prophet entered the city in triumph, he displayed a mercy that Bilal had embodied. He granted a general amnesty to the people of Mecca, but he asked Bilal to perform one symbolic act. He asked him to ascend to the roof of the Kaaba itself and give the adhan. As Bilal stood atop the very house that had once been surrounded by the idols of his oppressors, his voice rang out over a conquered Mecca. The man they had tortured for saying Allah is one was now proclaiming that same truth from their most sacred site. It was the ultimate victory of faith over force. After the passing of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the world felt empty for Bilal. His devotion was so intrinsically linked to the man who had freed him and given him purpose that he found it unbearable to remain in Medina. He asked the Caliph Abu Bakr for permission to go to the frontier and devote himself to jihad. Abu Bakr granted his wish, but with one condition, that Bilal returned to give the adhan on special occasions. Bilal spent his later years in Syria, living a life of simplicity and continued worship. Years later, during the Caliphate of Umar ibn al-Khattab, a request came. Umar and the people of Medina longed to hear the adhan from the one whose voice was synonymous with the early days of Islam. They implored Bilal to return for a visit. Bilal agreed. On the appointed day, he ascended the mosque of Medina once more. As he began the call, Allahu Akbar, a profound wave of emotion swept through the entire congregation. The companions who had fought alongside him and the new generation who had only heard stories of the early struggles were overcome. Grown men, hardened warriors like Umar al-Faruq, wept openly, their tears flowing uncontrollably. The sound of Bilal's adhan was not just a call to prayer, it was a living memory of the Prophet, of their shared sacrifices, of the miraculous journey from persecution to establishment. That day, the entire city of Medina wept for a past that was gone and for the beautiful voice that embodied it. Bilal eventually passed away in Syria around the year 640 CE. He died not as a former slave, but as one of the most beloved and revered figures in Islamic history. His grave in Damascus remains a site of visitation and reflection. So, what is the legacy of Bilal ibn Rabah? It is a legacy that shatters every artificial barrier humanity erects. It declares that true nobility is not in lineage or skin color or wealth, but in the content of one's character and the strength of one's faith. Bilal's life is a permanent testament to the transformative power of Islam. It took a man from the lowest rung of society and elevated him to a position of eternal honor, his name recited with love by over 1 billion people across the globe every day. His story is the ultimate answer to racism, to classism, to every form of bigotry. He proved that the human spirit, when anchored in the truth of divine oneness, becomes unbreakable. The next time you hear the adhan, wherever you are in the world, remember that its tradition begins with an Abyssinian slave on the burning sands of Mecca whispering ahad under a stone. His struggle validated the message. His voice inaugurated its call. His life cemented its justice. From the depths of oppression to the heights of the Kaaba, Bilal's journey is the journey of Islam itself, a journey from darkness to light, from chains to freedom, from the whisper of a single believer to a call that echoes across continents and centuries. His story is not just history, it is a living proof, and his voice in spirit never fell silent. It still calls, it still teaches, it still liberates.